Hello people, this is Duncan at Free as an Eagle. I have a mysterious day off today because I had a hiking trip planned for northern New Hampshire, which I was looking forward to, and then our weather looks like the day I wanted to climb Mount Washington is going to be a rain out, so I decided to bump the trip out for a couple of days, run up Tuesday, which gave me an unexpected couple of days off, so I'm pretty happy about that. And I've been actually doing a lot on the A-frame lately. I'm not going to try to cover all of it. I actually got my power hooked up the other day, which is really something to finally have power here after quite a long delay. So I'm not going to get into that one in this video. What I am doing today is finishing up a flight of stairs into the basement. I finally opened that up, and it's much simpler than the other angled flight of stairs. I'm going to turn this around so you can actually what we're doing, and I will walk over to the house. And another detail excuse me, that I'm working on is this porch. I had quite a little quandary figuring out how I was going to set up a porch roof over this little porch, and it turned out after a bunch of figuring I didn't like any other angle but the angle that the house pitch is already established at. So I decided to see how I could possibly make it work, and fortunately I was actually able to, because the loading on the walls and the fact that roof is so steep means that I could get away with framing it with 2x4s, because when you have a roof load, you're measuring the load that's horizontally on those rafters, which is only 4 feet because this porch is only 8 feet wide. So anyway, I was able to frame a 2x4. So that explains why you're seeing 2x4s pancaked to the front of this. They represent what's going to be the porch roof, and I think it's going to look pretty cool. It'll just have enough room to sneak under the windows and over the door, which is a little bit off-center, to allow for a hallway that's offset a little bit. But anyway, that's an aside. That's not my main focus today. Other thing I'll focus on for a second is just seeing this meter box. I actually did all this myself after watching a number of YouTube videos, and I was going to do one to pass along to you guys, and they showed up mysteriously quickly. As soon as I let them know I was ready, bam, they showed up and they got everything done, and that was quite an ordeal. I was a little nervous dealing with 200 amps of electricity, and I'm not an electrician, but in Vermont you can do your own work if you want to, and because I could save money and I wanted to learn how to do it, I went ahead and opted to do it. And it was exciting, a little nerve-wracking, but I connected up that meter box, and then I will walk in and show you what I did over here. I got the main panel. I decided I like a panel upstairs. I really wasn't big on, in fact, I didn't have the basement opening cut yet or the stairs down there, so I was like, well, if it's in a bathroom, which it's going to be, it's a little bit out of the way, and I can kind of hang something over it or just accept the fact that it's there, but it's much more convenient to access than if it were down in the basement, which is always an annoyance to me to have to go down to a basement to get to a breaker panel. And so you can see a little bit of wire, actually a very heavy service entrance cable coming in through the wall, and then of course over, up, and then it's in the panel. So that was an exciting project. Glad that's done. And now our main feature today is stairs. So we're going to talk about stairs. You can see the back of the angled stairs. I did a video on that. That was quite tricky. And right now there's paper taped over them to protect them from dirt. And I reinforced them temporarily with some extra material because I don't have any other central support. And there's a little bounce in those. The railings aren't in yet. So these stairs, however, see if I can, okay, I'm zoomed out. So these stairs are going to drop down into the cellar. And it turns out, I learned a little bit doing this too. It's been a much simpler build without the angles, but I realized rather quickly that even if I bring this out into right to the edge of the hallway to maximize the run out that I have there, I'm running into that wall long before I run out of stairs. And you don't want to have them so steep. In the old days, they would make terribly awkward and dangerous staircases with the drop more than the run out, which is kind of dangerous and awkward. And I realize I don't like bulkheads. I don't like outside entrances unless you're in a situation where they you can walk out onto a lawn. This isn't that type of setup. So I opted out of having a bulkhead. They tend to look lousy. They let water in, they let rodents in, Not my favorite. So I decided to just have an interior staircase to go into the cellar. And doing that required, for the sake of being able to carry big items, laundry machines, anything that might need to go down there. Ultimately, I like generous stairs. So these are 42 inches wide, and they're fairly gentle. I'm going to go through, for those that can deal with it and might want to do stairs one day, I'll go through the math quickly, but calculating these it's tricky, but it's very doable. And compared to the other flight of stairs, these are not bad at all. In fact, having hit sort of top of mind recently made it much easier to think it through. So you're looking down at a drop, and the stairs obviously required a landing. I wasn't going to be able to bring that down before it hit the wall, so I kind of factored that in mentally. But one thing I hadn't thought about was the fact that when you hit a landing, I was figuring, okay, I'll drop some stairs down on either side. Then when I opened this up and realized I was going to have a headroom problem from taking the angle, I realized I had to cut the opening in both directions and make an L, so that when you come down to that landing and turn left, then you are going down several more steps. So you want to have a minimum of 80 inches of headroom. So I had to make an adjustment and do some cutting out of material there. I'm going to have to add a post, which I haven't done yet, just to carry that corner that's kind of flying out in the air there. The rest of it's quite sturdy, not an issue, but when you have an odd corner like that, where you've removed a joist partway across, you've got to header it off and drop a post under there. So that won't be a big deal. But I'm going to run you quickly through some math that I did to get this calculated. As you can see, I got the upper stringers done and on the platform, and then I have the other pieces cut. There's some treads there for the lower stairwell, and we'll take a walk out here and I'll show you how the stringer aspect of it works. So I've cut these stringers, and funny, I was running out of 2x12, so I had a lot of 2x6 inside, and that became the stair treads, which is fine. And so the math on these things, I'm just going to walk you through this kind of quickly, but it's interesting, and you might remember enough so that if you're ever doing stairs, you'll understand what you've got to do math-wise. So what I did, I'm going to see if I can zoom in on this enough so you can read it a little bit. Okay, so I took my tape before I put the stairs in. I'd cut the opening, headered it off to strengthen everything up, so the opening itself would be carrying the load of the floor and the walls that are going to be on either side of the staircase. And having done that, so then you measure down from the top to the bottom, and right now there's a subfloor in there, which is 3/4 plywood, and eventually there'll be a finished floor. So these are small things that you got to factor in to get the math right. So measuring down directly from the subfloor to the concrete in the basement, I got 101 inches. And because the finished floor is going to be 3/4 of more wood, eventually probably some kind of hardwood, that's going to add 3/4. So now my total math drop to top to bottom is 101.75 inches. Now, what has to be done to figure out your stringers, which basically involve rise over run, and I'll swing over here for a minute just so you can see this stringer. So this stringer has obviously been cut, and it represents a 10-inch run, and which is a good assumption. Like most 2x12 wood is 11 1/4 wide. If you use two pieces of 2x6, you come up with 11. So an inch to an inch and a half overhang on rough stairs when you have treads that are basically 2x6s or 2x12s, they're pretty stiff, and you have three stringers across a span of 48 or 45 inches. This staircase is 42, so three stringers are enough. And what's going to happen if I put 2x6s, I can illustrate like this. So you're looking at this stringer, and when it's in place, you put a 2x6 there, you put another there, and you wind up with about 1.5 inches of overhang, which is good. But the net run on a staircase when you do this is 10 inches, because this is the cut here, and each one has an overhang. So when you factor the net distance across, and it's 10 inches. So that's something that's safe to assume. So you take your let's see, I flip this around. So you take that measurement that includes your total floor height down to the concrete, which is where it's going to land, and an approximately comfortable rise on stairs is about 7.5 inches. They say there used to be a law of 17s. If you add the rise and the run together, you should end up around 17. I think people were shorter when they came up with that. So my preference is to end up closer to 18. So anything between about 7.5 inches of rise and 8 inches is comfortable. So what you do, this is a funny part. So the 101.75 inches, if I divide that by 7.5 inches, it's going to come up with a number, but it's not going to probably be an even number. It's just giving me how many rises I'm going to have. So when I made that math there, the division, 101.75 divided by 7.5, it gave me 13.5667 inches. And that told me that I want an even number of rises, obviously, because you got to have an even number of stairs. So that said 13.5667. Now if I round that off and divide it back into the big number, it'll give me a specific amount of rise. So I divided by 7.5 inches, got 13, or rather, I divided by 13. That would be the total number of rises, and that gave me 7.8269. So that would be a rise, but now I got to make that something coherent. And the funny thing with carpentry, you're dealing with a system of math that gives you sixteenths and quarters and halves and things that don't correspond with decimals very well. So by dividing by 13 and getting this number 7.8269, I then have to do a little more math to determine what that translates into normal math that's used in carpentry. So 0.827 over 1 equals x, which is the mystery number, over 16. So this is a way to translate into sixteenths of an inch by simply doing this little cross multiplication. This is kind of going back to, like, I don't know, high school or even earlier, some sort of math. So anyway, if I multiply 16 by 0.827, I wind up with 13.23 over 16, which approximately ends up equaling 3/4 of an inch, because I just divided that down a little further. And so 3/4 of an inch plus 7 inches, which we had 7.8269, I end up with about a 7 3/4 inch rise, 7.75. And then I divide that into the 101.75, and it's pretty much on the dot, close enough. They allow you a 3/8 inch discrepancy in stairs. You don't want them varying much because you'll trip over them if one's an inch too higher than the other. That messes the things up. So then I come over here, and I have a framing square. I'm going to zoom this back out a little bit. Okay, so I start out with a blank piece of wood, 2x12, and my trick, they have these little brass buttons. I had a pair, I lost them years ago, but what I do is I take a marker and I mark 10 inches out on this framing square on the inside, and that represents my run. So I'm going in one direction the long way, and you can see a little mark that I made with a marker there. That's 10 inches out. So if I'm on the edge of the piece of wood, right now I've cut it all out so you're not seeing the edge of the wood, but if I have that mark 10 inches right on the edge of the wood, and then I come over here and I have another mark, I have multiple marks from doing several staircases, but the one that's lined up with the edge of the wood, it's at 7 3/4 inches. And if I take this and make marks on the wood, and then I can just slide the square along. In fact, I'll flip it around just to illustrate this a little better. If this was a blank piece of wood, I would just be, see if I get back here where I can, okay, that makes a little more sense. So anyway, if I line this square up in such a way that the 10 inches represents the run, and then on this end, the 7 3/4 represents the drop, then I just take a pencil and I trace that triangle, and that's what I'm going to cut out. And then what I do when I have those marks there, I'll just slide over and repeat the process, and I'll do it until I have the number of stairs that I need. Now, one thing you'll notice, and we'll walk over to the stairs now, I think I'm done with this part of it, but you measure from the very top down for the simple reason that you have to use that total distance to get your rise number. When you have your rise number, your actual stringer is going to start that far down from the top of the floor, So now I'm looking at this place where this ties in. I'll step down here a minute. So the stringer is going to tie into the headered off area of the floor here, and the level it's going to sit at has to represent the total rise down and landing on the first tread. So from this top edge right here, I'm going to pretend there's a finished floor piece, because that's what I'm factoring in for the total measurement. So I hold the tape with 3/4 sticking up above this to represent where it's going to start when the finished floor is in. Then I drop down the 7 3/4, and that's where the tread's going to be. And then I drop down another 1.5 inches, and that's where the stringer is placed. So the stringer sits 1.5 inches below these tread pieces that you see, and then that's allows me to place the stringer where once the treads are on, I've got my desired height. And then the rest of the process, fairly straightforward until you reach a landing point. So now I come down to the landing, and people get nervous. In fact, I used to get nervous about landings because, like, what do you do? That's a landing, but it really represents nothing but another stair. So when I come down on this, one thing you do have to do, I'll just step down here where I can see a little better. Okay. So one thing you do when you're doing these stairs is when you're landing on a finished surface and not another tread, then that's the tread. So you actually have to take 1.5 inches off the bottom to compensate for the fact that you're landing on the floor and not landing on framing that's going to have another tread on it. That's a tiny bit confusing, but this landing then becomes a stair, and I measure the same distance I did down from the top placement of a stringer to figure out where the stringers down here are going to land. So I figured that line out, and this is all dark down here, but so the stringer, the tread is going to be here on this one, and then I'm going to have framing down here. So I calculated these stringers based on measuring that height and then dividing it out. And if I did my math right, it's going to be exactly the same as the other stringer in terms of the rise and run, because when I factored it in initially, it was all the way to the bottom. So in other words, I'm just dividing up. Instead of having 13 stairs in a run, I'm going to have 7 of them, a landing is 8, and then I'm going to have 3 more coming off at this, and that'll eventually add up to my total number of stairs. So now that I've confused you to no end, hopefully you can pick up a little bit from this in terms of how to lay out a flight of stairs, and then things you've got to factor in when you're doing this. Again, on the bottom, I'm going to come down here. And one reason the stringers had a very skinny looking, very bottom piece, because I'm going to add a piece of pressure treated across the bottom. So I actually cut, I'll go back up and show you. So when you're dealing with concrete, you always want to have pressure treated lumber in contact with the concrete. So the posts and everything else have to be able to withstand concrete. And I believe this basement's going to be remaining quite dry, but nevertheless, you just do it because that's how it's done. So if we look at these stringers, so this represents having 2 treads on it that stick out that 1.5 inches. But when you get all the way down here, I'm actually going to add pressure treated wood under here, a couple of pieces going across. So then that adds up to what I want here. And that also factors in the fact that I'm landing on a finished floor. There's no tread going there, so I don't need to have that very thick because it's landing on a finished floor. So this tread is 1.5 inches. I'll just use this to illustrate. So you have the equivalent of a tread there, this little skinny thing plus this, and now you've got your 7 3/4 inches. So you're simply compensating by cutting it back when you're adding something here and you're adding a tread there, and then you're winding up on a finished floor. So everything ends up even within about 1/8 inch. So I'm within tolerances. It'll be comfortable. It'll be a nice little set of basement stairs. So my next part of my project is simply to place these stringers and attach them to the landing, and then I've cut out the rest of the treads that I need. So once we're done placing the stringers, we'll just go over here, we'll grab these guys, and we will put 2 on each step on the stringers below, and then we're going to be basically done. And the only thing I'll have to do after that is add a post to carry that corner. So I'm going to send that to the floor. It'll be a piece of pressure treated, and I'll tie that in so that that corner isn't floppy and hopping up and down if I jump on that. And then the rest of it will be all quite beefy. Everything else has been beefed up to handle a weight that's going to be on it. So that's today's little stairs video, and I will get back to work so I can get this all finished, and then I will have a break for lunch. But it's a beautiful sunny day today, and enjoy. Hope you all get something out of this. We'll talk again soon. Thanks.